Welcome to Shared Practices. Please leave us a review. Join us on our Facebook group. Or if you're about to buy a practice or already in a practice, reach out to us about coaching, mastermind, and everything that we're offering right now. So we'd love to help you out. We are in season 6, growth mode. This is my favorite season so far because George and I get to talk.
It's been since really season 2. We haven't had a season that we've done, really well together, fully all. Even I don't think ever actually.
Yeah.
So I'm excited for this to be the one, and it's fitting because this is the one that is the closest to my heart, like acquisitions was.
Yeah.
I think the two subjects that we've talked about on air that I feel the most passionate about are acquisitions and growth.
This is the episode that merges the two. But first, we had a message this morning from Aaron. I don't know why Aaron gets mentioned on air, but is not on air.
Because he's the oddball in our group. He's the one guy that doesn't fit in.
No, not that he doesn't fit in. He just hasn't come to any in-person events. He's got too many kids. He has how many kids I'm supposed to have.
At the rate that you were supposed to have them.
At the rate that I was supposed to have them. So he has outproduced me. And now he has the consequences to deal with, which is,
shout out Aaron.
Aaron, we love you. So Aaron brought up the fact that we said the last stage.
Oh, yes.
He took the last stage of last episode as culture, which we did. We were talking about culture, but I think maybe we said it the wrong way. But what we were talking about was removing yourself and having a culture that is the same or better. And so that requires that you had a great culture in the first place.
Well, it also requires that you're at a point where you're removing yourself, right? I think it's, we're talking about leadership challenges. And I think the level 5, I think is what he was referencing from last episode. By the way, those levels, I made them up as I was talking. So they're not there's no book that talked about, it was just whatever the next thing I was talking about, I just called it the next level.
Yeah.
But the level 5 that I'd mentioned last week, I said, culture remains when you leave, as in my practice, I left and culture had to remain. And initially it didn't. Right. And so that's the comment we made. But I think, and the point he was making was culture should be first. And he's right.
Yeah,
culture is first.
Did you hear that, Aaron? You're right.
Yeah.
All of our call outs aren't negative because he gets frustrated. He's like, I got called out again on the episode. But today,
I thought we were going to call him out, but I guess this is a nice Aaron. Thank you for providing great feedback.
Thank you.
And we will we'll make sure that we're more clear moving forward.
Yeah. And we did a whole season. We tried to do a whole season on culture just now. And so hopefully we were able to address some of that, and that was foundational to all of this. And it's going to be an ongoing thing.
I missed a lot of 5. I wasn't on. I was only on 2 episodes.
A couple episodes, yeah.
And so there is season 5 content that's going to just come out of me as we're talking about growth, just because it is an area that I'm very passionate about as well. I just didn't have the opportunity to really record a whole lot of it with you.
Totally. Yeah, and I think that's also leadership challenges will continue to be something that comes out in different seasons and is going to be the limiting factor in executing any change in your practice. And so it creeps into all seasons. So I think we've given ourselves permission to talk about that as often as we want to.
So I had a call today with this. So somebody reached out to me interested in coaching and, had some questions about how it works with our coaching department and everything. So I was on the phone with him, and he's like a long time listener. And it was kind of funny. I think I sometimes forget, me and you recording season 2 on air. I was a 3rd-year dental student and you were an AEGD resident. We started this thing really, really, having accomplished nothing,
Yeah.
And, for you to own 3 practices and for me to own, I think it's funny, revenue wise, I think our, we're about equal. It's just, in the way that
schedule wise and revenue wise right now.
What'd you say?
Schedule wise, we both do a half a day of dentistry right now.
And we both have, dental, we both have producing about the same amount in our respective things. It's just the way we did it is a bit different, but it's funny that, I think I sometimes forget that we've been doing this podcast the whole time.
Right.
Because he was talking about how cool it's been to watch us grow on air.
Mm.
And I think that was the piece that, you and I recording together is sort of we had a big break where we didn't record together. And a lot of that growth happened in that time.
Right.
And now we're both kind of, at least for me, I have a lot more time now, so I can be on air a lot more. And so anyway, I thought that was cool to just kind of talk to him, and then coming back here to record with you. It's just cool.
Well, and I think it also relates to today's episode a little bit too, because we got to hang out in person in Monterey, and you got to meet one Michael Rice.
Yeah.
So we don't need to go into the full story, but the circumstances of how Dr. Rice got to meet the shared practices team were interesting, to say the least, and involved board games. We'll leave it at that. But like what you're saying, these people that who have known us the whole time. So Rice was there literally as I was starting this. And, it's like I'm doing case presentations, stressed out about residency, and then he knows that I'm doing the podcast. Rice is also known for doing backhanded compliments. And so he is he has backstories to everything. The stories he tells are phenomenal, and they always have to have a backstory. He goes back like 20 paces to, let you know.
Nice.
But then when he listened to the podcast for the first time, he's like, it's not bad. And I'm like, why did you have to put the word surprisingly in there? Like, you could have just said that it was a good podcast, not that like you expected it to suck because I made it and I exceeded
that's
your
like my thing.
expectations.
Yeah, I get in trouble for that all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's great. So, but George, he was also there when you came on the show. And so like, also, there was some like, this George guy, who's this George guy? And having to explain who you were and hearing you on the show and all of that. You're a different person than you were back then.
Oh yeah. Not even remotely close. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's,
I was a third year dental student. Like you,
yeah.
I think that's very typical of both entire company is, we tend to have faith in our people and put them in positions where they might not view themselves as totally worthy yet. Or they like, I'm thinking of Tyler Tolbert as I'm talking about this, where we put him on TPO to, and the things that we have in line for him, and like you took a chance on a third year dental student that you thought would be really good. And yeah, it's funny I love the stories of like, hey man, I was super skeptical of you guys.
Yeah.
And then watching that turn around is pretty cool.
That's fun. And in everyone's defense, like, I didn't have any legitimacy, and you're way better on air than you used to be. So, like,
oh, for sure, yeah,
yeah. But all of this is going to come back in a minute here with growth, and we got to actually, okay, intro over. Time to actually get to the main interview segment.
Yes, I'm happy we did it again. Yes, I want to keep doing these if we're going to record. We say, what is intro? Now we're going to transition into the interview. Yes.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's good podcasting protocol right there, George. I was having a conversation with another friend yesterday. This is a shout out to Caleb Stott. He's
another skeptic.
He initially was a little bit of a George skeptic, especially because of how young you are in your career and how prescriptive you are in practice underwater and all of these things. But we were having a conversation about what does a 5-year plan look like? What would a journey look like for someone who is interested in practice ownership right now? And the first conversation was, okay, well, what kind of practice do you want? Do you want to be the solo doc who crushes it on a certain schedule, 3 days a week or something like that, and you've got a low overhead, you're killing it? Or do you want a little bit bigger practice that you could then continue to produce in or step away and have, one or two associates that are producing without you there? And he leaned more towards the group model at this point. And so we were talking about, and we can talk about this theoretically instead of, about my friend instead. It became really clear to me this season and in the last few months that real estate is one of the biggest limiters on your ability to grow. And we've talked about that a little bit in the season so far, but not like a full episode. So I wanted to circle back and have a full conversation about these things that you wouldn't think are that important, but all of a sudden become very important when you run out of ops and run out of space and are trying to push and build something that you can't currently handle.
So 2 things I want to add to that before we get into the conversation.
Yeah.
One, this is probably one of the biggest oversights that we missed in the entire pre-ownership season period time on our show. I think vision was severely missed, and I think real estate. And it's funny because it's Matt. I think I called him out a little bit, and I'll call him out again. He followed everything we had talked about. Matt is a very direction oriented person,
Right.
and he walked into a space, signed a long term lease when he didn't have to. And looking back on that now, I would look at it and say, like, Matt, I told him, like, what did you do? He's like, well, at the time, that's what you guys were kind of talking about. I was like, I guess that's true, right? And
Right.
we are a company that does things very differently from industry standard. And the pros of that are we innovate, and a lot of great things come out of our inability to just listen to the way things were done. And the con of that is sometimes we have to learn things ourselves, and we evolve and change over time. And I think this is an area pre-ownership. I think those two, right, vision and this one, are two areas where me and our clients and everyone that we interact with had to kind of run into this real estate issue before we realized it's probably a bigger deal than we thought it was.
And I want to point out the reverse call out on this with Matt is, we were attempting to accumulate the best information that we had at hand and provide that to our audience.
Yeah.
And Matt took that and has been extremely successful. If you were to look at Matt's practice and say,
oh yeah, I mean,
this guy's killing it. So following the prescription that we had at the time worked really, really well. It's just we have continued to gain more information and more kind of big picture options and perspective and vision. And so that then affects that earlier decision and the acquisition. The hard part is sometimes you don't know until you're in practice ownership what kind of practice owner you want to be. You really don't.
Well, and it's funny because if you look at my first year of ownership, my practice grew 30 to 40%. That was kind of like just the typical breakaway stuff that you do. My second year of ownership, that's more our philosophy. As we were developing it, my practice doubled in size. And so it's like, I think this issue is being accentuated in our practice philosophy, run offices, right? Because they're growing so quickly. They're very quickly outgrowing their real estate. And it's presenting this issue. So it's almost hyper magnifying this thing that we didn't think about pre-ownership. And it's just being accentuated even more so in a shared practices philosophy run office. Right. And so yeah, it's interesting, right? I don't think I ever. So it's funny. I bought my practice, and at the time, Justin Short was my coach, and I told him, like, hey, Justin, my plan is to be a solo, like you, productive solo, and I think I have too many ops, 8. Yeah. And he was like, yeah, well, you won't complain about extra ops. It'll be fine. Pretty much what he said. And 2 years later, I'm totally out of space. Like, right. It's a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's insane. So I think it's, things creep up on you quickly when you're growing quickly.
I'm now of the philosophy that 8 ops is like a line in the sand.
Oh yeah. Minimum.
Yeah.
I would say 7 is a minimum.
Okay.
So I remember I went to Breakaway and Scott was talking about the difference between the 4th and 5th op is pretty big for a solo. Okay. Because then that's like barely minimally viable for like an efficiently run group.
Okay.
You could potentially, do some creative things with the schedule. I would say, with our philosophy, the 6 ops is really hard. The 7th I can get with, I can put an associate out of 1 op a couple days a week. And I have, the owner doc working out of 2 ops, associate out of 1, and then 4 hygienists. So it gives me like a minimally viable group with 7 ops. It is a stretch. It doesn't work with a high producing associate, but with like an average associate, it does work. So, and then you could have like big case days. So 7, I think, is like the minimum line in the sand for a group.
Right. But if you have the option, like I'm of the point where so this conversation that I was having, it was like, okay, I would either buy a practice with 8 ops, even if it's not a 2 doc practice, at least find a practice with 8 ops, or I'd almost consider doing a startup. Like, and that will add 2 years to the timeline. So my timeline that I was brainstorming and going with was, if you buy a single doc practice with 2 operatories, or sorry, with 8 operatories, it's going to take you at least 2 years, probably right around 2 years, to grow that into a 2 doctor practice. Like, that's a fair trajectory. It might be faster, might be slower. If you're going to start up an 8 op practice, it's probably going to take 4 years to get to a 2 doctor practice.
Can I add a caveat to this statement?
Please,
Because
absolutely.
if we're talking startups, it's like a button of mine. And so I'm with you. I think I've talked about this before where I feel like startups, there needs to be the proper indication to do a startup,
Right.
and very large group practice I would put as an indication. But it has to be like 12 to more 12, like 11, 12, like a number of operatories that you're realistically not going to find as an acquisition. Like if I'm doing a startup and I'm starting up with 8 ops, why am I not starting up with 11 or 12?
Right.
You know,
If you're doing it for the purpose of a group, I guess
yeah.
the indication is I have been searching in this area and there are no practices through direct methods, through all of the, I've exhausted all of the methods of searching for practices, not just through brokers, and I can't find a practice with more than 8 ops. In that case, do a startup with as many as you can fit into the space and afford, preferably 11, 12.
Can I include a wrinkle to this plan?
Yes.
So I actually would, if we're looking at, so okay, let's have this conversation on air because I think it's important. So step one, and this is Rich and I talking about this for the first time. you know,
Yeah,
so
people are going to like make life-changing decisions based on this conversation, and we're sorry that we're just having this for the first time now on air.
but
That's okay.
it's step
It is
one.
what
Yeah,
it is.
obviously, right. You need to find the correct number of operatories in an acquisition, of course. But you're saying plan B is a startup. I would argue I would much rather plan B be, look, we both agree that our biggest gripe with a startup is that it takes 2 years. But the benefits are you get the high new patient flow of a great location, you get the space potentially. So I think a great in between option, and this is something I pitched on an episode of The Pursuit of Ownership, is buy like a smaller practice, work it for 2 years, and then move it into the new space.
Mm.
I would much rather do that than just do a startup with no patients.
Okay.
So like, go ahead.
Well, so my thought is, um, to do that, you want to make sure. I mean, obviously, it's got to be a solid practice in the first place because you're going to then do a second build out. You're taking on a second loan
Mhm.
and need to have the overhead or the ability to make that move and float that transition. So that's where people who buy too small in the first place and it's not a good, healthy, profitable practice, or it's marginal in some areas, or they think they're going to improve it in X, Y, and Z ways, and they don't end up improving it. Then they're kind of stuck, and that's the really hard place to be in.
So I'll give you a good example. So one of our clients, he is a shout out Eric if you're listening. He bought a 6 operatory practice with 2 hygienists 5 days a week.
Okay.
So 6 operatory practice, right? I'm kind of describing Bolt,
Yeah.
in a lot of ways. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that name, but like,
Right.
I'm describing
One of my practices.
one
Yeah.
of your practices. And, he has the issue. He's like, when am I ready for the third hygienist? And I told him, well, if you didn't just buy this thing and like you'd owned it for a year and like infrastructure was stable with staff and everything, I'd tell you to pull the trigger right now. You already have the indication for a third hygienist. So, his goals, we're very quickly going to get there. And it's interesting because for him, luckily the lease was getting negotiated like right as he started talking to us. And so we told him, get yourself a buyout clause in that lease, and get out of there, get the ability to get out of there. So now at year, I think it's either 3 or 5, we have the ability to leave the space and go to a new space. And so that gives us time to grow the practice sufficiently and then move. So you're walking into a group practice size facility with a group practice size team, patient base, everything. It's a much different move than starting a 12-op practice without any patients.
Right. That's a ballsy thing to do.
Exactly. And so I love that in between step and that's where Matt, he bought his practice and he had like 3 years left on his lease. And I would have loved to negotiate a couple 1-year options after that. And just give yourself 5 years of, you have a stable location, but year 3
you lending
out of there. Yeah.
But then,
and so I just love the ability to do that. And you can get stuck in a small space. And so obviously, right, like I bought an 8-op practice. I never thought I would outgrow it. But I did. And I signed an 8-year lease.
Right.
And by the time I move, I'll have 4 years left on it. And I just got to figure out what to do with that. It's a problem.
Right.
But still, I mean, the value of an operatory is circa $400,000 of production per year,
Right.
production collections per year. So like you still like the effect of not having enough space is much like obviously you rather move than have any other issue, but at the
Right.
same time you would like it to be somewhat straightforward.
Totally. So this goes back to, okay, so you've had clients, we've got people, some of us may be in this situation where you've got a space you want to grow. Um, what are some other creative options
Mhm.
to survive this phase of um, not enough space, but we want to grow the practice? So one is to add time and days, right?
Yeah. So this is where for me I realized it was actually the hot seat that we did for Mastermind. So we do this thing, a monthly hot seat. And for the very first hot seat ever, they put me on the hot seat, just sort of to
Mm,
show everyone how it works. And everyone looked at my numbers in PBN and they were asking me questions. And one thing that came up that I wasn't expecting was, you are going to be out of capacity sooner than you expected. I kind of thought I could kick the can down the road 3 or 4 years before I started worrying about a new space. And they helped me realize that I was a year away from having a problem. And so,
so when was this hot seat?
June or July, I think July.
Okay.
So a couple months
Not
ago.
that long ago, like 2 or 3
No.
months ago.
And one thing I did as a result was I sat down with Alex Sharp and we split shifted my team.
Mm,
So the hot seat kind of made me realize, like, oh crap, I'm
yeah.
going to have a capacity issue. I need to do something to buy myself time because no matter what, in a year, I got nothing.
Right.
And so I split shifted my team. And so what we do in my practice now is we run in 2 chairs for hygiene. Hygiene is the problem, right? Like that's where you're going to run into capacity issues. You typically don't run into them a whole lot on the doctor side, or they're easier to alleviate. But on hygiene, we have so now in my practice we run 3 hygienists a day out of 2 chairs. So
Mm.
now in a 1 day period, I can fit 6 hygienists in my practice on a given day because we split shifted.
So how do you do that?
So we have I'm so happy you asked because it's like, yeah. So we have a 7 to 1 shift in the morning.
Okay.
So it's a 6 hour shift, but it's attractive to a lot of hygienists because they don't like working a lot. So I can have a hygienist come in from 7 to 1, and then I have another one come in from 12 to 6. So we
Okay.
have like morning, evening, but then there's an hour there between 12 and 1 where they overlap. So what we do is we have an 8 to 5 hygienist, and then she switches rooms over lunch. So if you think about it, she works
Oh,
from 8 to 12, and then she takes lunch. And then there is another hygienist at 12 that comes into her op and works till 6. And then she takes her lunch. And at the end, the morning hygienist is done at 1. And then she takes that op and goes till 5.
weird. Okay. So you
So
get 3 hygienists in 2 chairs,
in a whole
split
day.
shifted in a, okay. Huh. That's
So
cool.
so now we can have that increases my capacity to like 8 hygienists in my first office. And then when we move, I'll have 8 hygiene chairs, and then I could have 12 on any given day. So now, like, I fixed the schedule early enough. And obviously, every time you change the schedule, it's annoying for the team because you have to change
It's
up
a
their
big deal
hours.
for people. Yeah.
And so it was a lot of negotiating and a few tiers and just kind of sorting through the schedule with everybody. And, but now it's funny because 2 months ago, my practice was everyone started at the same time.
Mhm.
And now we have some
3
staff.
start times.
Look at these start times: 7, 8, 9, 8:30, and noon.
One in there as well? No, noon to noon. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I
Okay.
know. Those are our start times. And yeah, I think that's what all of them. So for different departments, we have people coming in at various hours of the morning, 7,
Okay.
8, 8:30, 9, 12. But then it creates a very scalable schedule. And so, that's one creative thing that we do. The other thing is, obviously you open up Fridays. I think a lot of these docs don't open up Fridays. But we have this sort of templated scheduling. So if you come to us and say, hey, I have 6 ops and I want to be a group and I want to work 3 days or I want to work 4 days, there's kind of already a template in place that is, kind of predetermined as best practices that we
Right.
have internally. So in your example, right, you have a 6 op practice that we're talking about. as an example, we can use a 6-op practice. If you say, I want to work 4 days, for example, as an owner doc, then we would probably put you on a Monday through Thursday. Your associate would work a Tuesday through Friday. So then we have, we can then cover all 5 days without, giving you an inconvenient schedule. And then if we need to do a split shifting morning, evening, then we will go from there. But yeah, it's not ideal. I think it's funny. I hear people talk about split shifting a lot, but it's like split shifting of like a 7 to 4, 9 to 6. That's not really split shifting because they're there at the same time.
They still require their own chairs the whole time.
Yeah, that's not like true split shifting in my mind, because you have to have a true split shift. You have to be able to have almost 2 teams, or like the way that I described it, right? I have 3 hygienists on any given day, but I only have 2 chairs. So there has to be, but there is that hour from 12 to 1 where I have 2 hygienists seeing patients and 1 eating lunch. And it's like, that's a true split shift, is when the schedule is that well done, where there isn't, because if you could have people there from 7 to 4 and 9 to 6, then you could just have them all there from 7 to 4, or them all there from 9 to 6. The split shift isn't truly needed. It's just the patient convenience thing of offering some extended hours.
Right.
But a true split shift opens up, in my practice, it opened up about 25% capacity.
This episode is brought to you by Swell. So all of us who are already using Swell know that it crushes reputation management. It's like turning on a steady stream of reviews that requires no effort from your team and just works. It's amazing. Additionally, it makes it easy to stay in touch with all of your patients before and after their visits. And it even has a great way to set up a virtual waiting room. But there's more good news. Swell has a brand new version of their platform. And on top of being simpler than ever to use, you can now actually get patients to pay via mobile, which is incredible. The reason that Swell is so effective at getting reviews is they make it easy. They've now brought that same ease of use to paying for dental treatment even after patients have left the office. Mobile payments are a great way to text them a reminder so they can pay at their convenience right on their phone. You can pay via credit or debit card, ACH, or even Apple Pay or Google Pay with just a few taps. No more phone calls, no more chasing people down with emails and letters that always seem to get lost. And it gets better. This new release includes Swell Schedule, which is an easy way for patients to request an appointment time that works for them, so you can lock down those appointments quicker. Listen, Swell is one of those things that you just need to try it out, turn it on, see the results, and then you're converted and you're like, well, I'm never going to shut this off. Listeners of the Shared Practices podcast can try Swell for free for 30 days. No commitment. Just set it up, see the results for yourself before you pay anything. To take advantage of this offer, head to swellcx.com/sharedpractices. That's swellcx.com/sharedpractices. And maybe you continue this. Maybe people love this. Maybe like some of your hygienists are like, man, this is the schedule I want for the rest of my life. Or when you move into that bigger facility, you can change the schedule back.
It's not going back.
It's not. Now that we're in the split shift.
No. This is amazing. Yeah, no, it's my entire, I think 80 to something, 90% of them are very happy with the new schedule.
Cool.
They viewed it as an improvement. I think the one thing that they do miss is the camaraderie of
everyone
on the same schedule. Like they're like, it kind of feels like we don't interact as much anymore. That is one, piece of feedback we've heard. But we're introducing tomorrow, Wednesday is our first happy 2 hours, where we have happy hour as a team once a month to make sure that we all.
I like that you can't just call it happy hour. You have to distinguish that it's a happy 2 hours. Most of the time, I bet happy hour lasts longer than an hour.
I know, but I thought it was a quirky, funny thing that we call it happy 2 hours. I think that's hilarious. Obviously, that was my idea. So that's why it's called happy 2 hours.
That's the branding expert in you coming out right now. Uniquely George idea. No, that's great. I think you identified a problem, there is for a lot of people, this opened up some schedule opportunities for them, but you did eliminate the everyone on the exact same schedule, taking lunch at the same time and hanging out. And here's the solution, which is we're going to hang out once a month. Not everyone has to go. I'm sure probably the first one.
Totally optional.
More people are going to go. And over time, you'll probably have your happy 2 hour regulars and then people that only come every 3 or 4 months or whatever, that's okay.
Yeah. But I think it's, you, and this is in general, right? Like I realized I always try to learn every lesson once.
Hmm.
And so, I've learned the lesson once with real estate. I'm never again going to make the same mistake twice. And so I'm not going to go back to changing the schedule up so that I don't like, I would much rather have, I'm going to probably need that space one day, even when we move or whatever. I don't want to put the schedule back into this difficult spot and then have 3 times as many employees and have to put them all back into this
Then
great schedule.
rearrange the schedule
Yeah.
again.
So the schedule is the way it is from now on. This is how we do
Yeah.
it in my practice, period.
Yeah.
And
That's the new hygiene standard.
Yeah. We're Monday to Thursday, 7 to 6, Friday, 7 to 2, period.
Okay.
Yeah.
Love it. Okay. So we talked about, kind of different day overlap. We've talked about the patented George true split shift hygiene schedule. What are some other ways of getting through this time period?
So when you buy an old practice, you have to deal with their floor plan. And I didn't have any room for a cone beam. And so I had to blow down a closet to put a cone beam in place so that there was no pano room. There was no pano in this practice period. So we actually we have a cone beam now in the spot that used to be a like paper towel storage closet.
Right.
And so sometimes it's retrofitting the floor plan to your vision a little bit. We're having an issue right now with checkout where we only have one checkout station. But we have 8 patients there at once, a lot of times ending appointments at the same time. And so now we're currently working on getting 2 checkout stations in the one giant window that we have and making that flow. And so it's always a lot of, as you grow, you kind of like run into your floor plan over and over again if it's not built well. Right. And so I think again, I think you have to, like, going back to our listener, right? I want to make this applicable to them. If their vision is 2 docs, then they should never move. You just buy a practice big enough to fit 2 docs. Right. But if your vision is more than 2 docs there at once, I think that's where I like either the start it up or the buy and move path, because realistically, there are not a whole lot of 13 op practices for sale, that you can afford.
Right. Absolutely. But knowing where you're going to go is the most important thing, because your space is going to either allow you to do that or stop you every
Yes.
step along the way.
And I wish I had, going back in time, I wish I had negotiated a lease that would have been more favorable to me moving.
Right. You didn't know you were going to have this problem.
I had no clue.
Yeah.
I thought, I'm actually surprised it was an 8-year lease. I don't even know how I ended up with an 8-year lease. I thought it was 10. So
pleasant surprise.
Yeah, pleasant surprise, honestly. I was like, oh, nice. It worked out.
The process of, if you buy a single doc practice with an excess of chairs and then grow it into a multi-doc practice, along the way, you end up building an engine of growth that then you have to decide, do we hit the brakes on this once we hit 2 doctors, or do we do something else? And so that's an interesting thing, because for a lot of people, I think they think, oh, growth is so hard. Well, once you start growing, it has a momentum to it. And you're like, do I put a cap on this and say, hey, we're calling it good here? Or do I then get creative and think, what would the next step be? Can I add a space next to me in my shopping mall, strip? If you're next to a hair salon or a sports award store or whatever, can you talk to the landlord and expand that way? But that's kind of how you've found yourself in this situation. But I think it's different. So what if someone knows they absolutely only want 2 docs? They have to scale up and then hit the brakes.
Do you like it when I tell stories every time you ask? I like the story way of answering the question because I think it helps our listeners see like an example.
I would prefer our entire podcast to be stories.
Okay, yes. Cool. Because at this point we have a lot of clients, so I have a lot of client stories. But this one we all know, Ashley Hovis. So she actually is working with one of our coaches, Caitlin. So she's with our coaching department with Caitlin. And one thing that we do when we onboard a client is we kind of have like a vision call with either our director of coaching. In her case, I was sort of in on that because we know each other well. And we sort of painted the picture for her that she gets like 70 something new patients a month right now. And she loses about 10 patients from her practice a month. So if you think about that net gain of 700 patients a year that she has right now in her practice, in 6 ops, plumbed for a 7th. We're obviously 6 parking spaces is like the joke that we all talked about on air. So we actually have solved the parking spaces issue.
Okay.
But anyway, like it. So I think can I talk about the parking thing real quick? I think
Yeah, I think it's very relevant.
So our Caitlin is her coach. She's one of our coaches, and she has a degree in urban planning and development. And she was managing a very large. So she was the office manager before shared practices at a large group practice in Seattle.
Okay.
And so she was like, nobody had parking in Seattle. Like this, if you live in these areas, you just kind of expect to not have parking when you're going to. Yeah.
Anytime you go somewhere, it's going to be a thing.
Yeah.
You need to budget 20 minutes prior to wherever you're going to find somewhere to park and walk.
And so she offered this different perspective on the whole situation that we didn't have otherwise. And so Caitlin was actually fantastic. And she's like, look, I mean, we had this practice in Seattle. This is how we ran it. We sent every patient a notice saying parking is hard to find. You park on the street and 15 minutes before your appointment so you can find parking and still be on time. And it was just in their confirmation system. It was every patient in their practice just knew, if I'm going to this office, and we checked the codes in Folsom, and it's, historic Folsom is the area she's in, where parking on the street is a thing. And like the road has this little space where you can parallel park. And so, yes, she'll have 6 spaces in her lot, but they should be positioned to patients as, if you're lucky, you get one of these 6 spaces. If not, you park on the street.
Right.
And so then that kind of unlocked us the ability to use her practice as the full 7 ops that it is. Right. And right now it's plumbed for 6 because they have infrastructural issues with scheduling and organization that will not allow us to like fully utilize how much demand she has.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of saying this jokingly because, you've listened to the episode where we talk about it.
Yeah. And if anyone is interested in this journey of realizing that she only had 6 parking spaces and the limitations thereof, go listen to Dental Friends with Benefits. It is a very different shared practices podcast, but if you enjoy it, then we're happy to have you.
Yeah. So with her, but anyway, back to the original plan was she has an excess of demand.
Mm-hmm.
And so once we get the kind of the bearings in place on her practice, and she's worked with, and her office manager and our coach are working closely together to sort of organize things on her end, then that's when we can actually like really have a ton of patients come through that practice and have them scheduled efficiently, and then she can have 2 docs there at once. She's very quickly going to outgrow that space.
Right.
But her practice and her vision, she has 2 ways she can go. She can either go the fee-for-service route where she starts cutting insurance because they offer a very fee-for-service type experience. Right. And they tend to be fee-for-service time. So, I think she's an example of someone who I'd look at that might go the other way, where they just cut insurance and use their high demand to increase their profit margins and grow their practice, by production per patient, which he already does incredibly well. Versus going to buy, like, not everyone's going to do the thing that I did where you go get a humongous facility and you move.
Right.
So there's that other route where you stay in your facility and you just cut insurance and you use your excess of demand to just be very profitable.
I love it. No, that's great, because that's the what to do with this engine you've built. The answer is start cutting insurance, go fee for service, or increase your percentage of fee for service.
Yeah.
It's like, I love that you call it an excess of demand, because I was briefly an econ major. I got all of before my mission. So I went on a 2-year mission, but I got 2 years of college in before that. And I thought I was going to be an econ major, and I had taken calculus, and I wanted to get all of the calculus dependent econ classes done before I left for my mission, and then forgot calculus. Yeah.
That's smart.
Learned Spanish instead. So I crammed in a ton of econ classes. And just loved thinking about things in those terms, so that you have this supply and demand issue. Rather than increasing supply to meet that demand, you're increasing the price, aka removing insurance and going fee for service, and sometimes
to lower your demand to match your capacity. Exactly.
Totally.
And for Ashley, right, I think when we think about her why, and this goes back to, I think one of the things we do really well is we don't have a system. It's not like the shared practices way is PPO large practice. It's whatever's right for that doc.
Right.
And for Ashley, she has a vision of this exceptionally run, very fun, patient-centered practice where they offer this really high-touch quality experience, where it's the type of dental office she would want to go to. Like, that's everything everything about her team and everything the way it's run is that way. And
Right.
that vision doesn't necessarily fit the 18-20 op practice. It's a
No.
smaller but very profitable operation. And so, for her, that's really what we view as, I think we've kind of all tentatively decided on that idea. And we
Cool.
call these things pivot points. And so usually with a client, we'll establish what we call a pivot point. We're going to get here. And then at that point, we're going to make the decision. This is the way we think we're going to go, but we could go either way. We don't like pre-commit to the whole path. So we said, we're going to get to the point where you're maxed out 2 docs, 7 ops. Then we'll probably go this way. But at that time, we'll have the discussion again.
Nice. And I love it because it goes back to what we've said throughout this episode, which is ideally, if you knew what your final practice would look like from the very beginning, you would either just buy that or build that.
Yeah.
But you often don't know. It's a
No.
journey that you can't know beforehand. And so until you get in there and get your feet wet, we can give you some probable pathways. And this is laying out that pathway if you're looking to grow. But have we talked enough about the solo doc growth pattern and real estate limitations there, other than just make sure you have at least 5 or 6 hops?
4 is a minimum.
Okay.
4 is the BAM. You were talking about 8 for a group. It's just half for a solo, right? 2 hygienists, 2 assistants, seeing patients out of 2 chairs. I think I'm happy you talked about the solo because I was thinking about the solo because right, our sort of our fresher eyes on pre-ownership have shown us that having that conversation preemptively of saying, are you a solo or are you a group? And having them sort of pre-establish themselves before they look to buy a practice is sort of our newer direction on that. Newer as in like the past year. And I think at the same time, you look at something like that and you say, well, they could also change their mind, right? We just talked about pivots.
Right.
And I think the biggest thing for the solo is to know it might be good for you right now. You might not want it later, and that's okay. And if you think solo is the way for you, then just do it. And if one day you change your mind, then I'm sure we'll find a way to get you out of that situation and get you to where you want to be. Like, there's nothing permanent, and everything is. So I think it's in both of these things. It's just knowing that you make your best guess as to what's right for you, but then I would so much rather you have the courage and ability to listen to your desires and what your heart wants versus just doing whatever you said you'd do 5 years ago.
Totally. And the pivot might be the other direction too. So I brought this up on air, but my dad went to a dentist recently who used to have associates. And he was like, you know what? I just got sick of turnover and of work in my office that I didn't feel great about. Like he didn't feel that, he was fixing too much associates work, or, he was really stressed about the clinical dentistry that was going on inside of his operation. And in the end, for him, it was the right decision to be a solo doc in that office.
Can I critique that? Because that's not something that I would.
Well, I'm expressing his mindset around his decision. This is how he expressed what happened.
Totally. And I feel like for me, when I'm practice underwater, right, we get a lot of people that come on and they bring like, hey, I want to be a group practice owner. And then they tell me why they want to be a group. And it's like, because they want to take vacation. I'm like, okay, cool. Like be a solo owner and take vacation,
right.
And it's like, I have to kind of be, and this is probably, as much my issue as theirs, but I feel like for somebody to like do a major decision like that, they have to have a really good reason to. And a lot of the things that you just brought up, I feel like are things that can be structures that can be put into place to.
There were other options for this dentist.
Yeah.
Other than going back.
Yes.
He had a good thing and he burned it to the ground. And if you had the chance to work with him for a couple of years, he might have kept it and just had more controls in place or more coaching or more accountability, different stuff. Yeah.
We talked about this last time, but as you grow, more infrastructure is required. And rather than shrinking,
and your problems change.
Your problems change.
He didn't build new infrastructure. He said, I don't like these problems. I'm out of here.
Yeah. And so it's like you just left a really great thing because you didn't have the proper infrastructure in place, as opposed to just putting the proper infrastructure in place. Now you're doing something that you're just doing to avoid these issues that you could have avoided another way. Sure. And so I don't love that as a reason to scale back.
No.
But I think, imagine if I was a dentist and I said, I used to know all of my patients by name. And I used to talk to them for like 10 or 15 minutes about their family, and I don't like managing a large team. There's too many people here. I want something very simple, and and it's been delegated well when it's done effectively, but at the same time you just want like a more intimate relationship. To me that feels like an indication to go back.
Yeah.
Or I say I just want to do like niche practice where I just do like this one type of procedure. You could either build that within your bigger practice or you could just go back. So I feel like for me, for somebody to scale back, it would have to be a really good reason other than I don't have the proper structure in place in the big place.
So before you scale back, call George.
Yeah, I mean, like I cannot think of a single situation in which I would ever do that.
Right. But that's also you.
That's what I'm saying. But like if somebody's a personality where they're like, I wanna be the star and I wanna do all of the dentistry and I wanna like, all of these things, then cool. But that would feel like a very backwards move to me unless it was in the right, and I think I read this story on Dental Town once that I loved. It was this guy that gosh, I forgot this thing. So he had 9 practices and he built them up in his like 30s and into his 40s, and then his wife died at some point in that journey, and he just realized that like it was, he kind of like, I've been working so hard and killing myself for what? And so he sold everything, he took a break, and then he started over with like a small practice, small team. I think he ended up remarrying, and he just does like fee for service dentistry that he loves, big cases all day. And he's like, I'm so much happier. And like, to me, that felt like a more appropriate thing than, just, and I think you could even look at his 9 practices potentially and say that he could have done them differently.
If he had done it differently, maybe, but
he could have had that same experience. But like a major life event or something like that, I would feel supportive of a scaling back, downsizing, or whatever. But I think I'm pretty skeptical of that in general.
I'm glad we're talking about this.
No, but my pet peeve, we talked about startups. My pet peeve is the 6-op or less startup. Why?
Okay.
Like, why? I cannot get behind that one, period. Unless you're going to be like insanely different than every other dental practice that has ever existed. Like, you can buy one, like I can't get behind that one. But like, I think 10 ops or more, I'm good with a startup in the right situation. But
even if you think you're going to be a solo doc, still put in at least 8 ops. Like, even if your plan is to never have an associate, just
exactly. If you're gonna be a startup, throw 8 ops in there. Like, what is it, an extra $200,000? Like, ugh, yeah. That is my pet peeve, is a startup of 6 ops or less. Oh,
okay. You heard it on air here, folks.
Oh, jeez. Yeah, that is like nails on the chalkboard to me.
Well, this has been exactly the conversation I was hoping we'd have. And once again, we still haven't like dove headfirst, you and I at least. We've talked about marketing. We've had Kashavi and Matt on. We've had some other things. But all of these things are bigger picture discussions that influence the how and when and the why you're growing your practice in the first place, which are way more important and sometimes what holds you back in the end. So this is the conversation we wished we'd had at the beginning of season 2 of Shared Practices.
No, and I mean, from a listener's perspective, I think this is an important conversation to hear about, because your mind needs to be prepared properly so that when you look at situations and opportunities, you see them the right way. And I think the best thing we can do is sort of share stories from our experiences and hope that everyone listening is going to take something a little bit different from it. But it's whatever they needed in that moment when they listened to this episode was probably what they'll take.
Totally. No, I love it. Cool. Well, now let's do intro mode or outro mode, George. This is the outro.
Oh man, Richard, this was a lot of fun. What did you take away from today's episode?
You know what? I really like the stories that you shared. Let's rehash those exact same stories in a summarized form. Actually, listeners like that. People like the
summary outros. I don't like the summary outros.
I got feedback around that people were like, yeah, I liked it when you like hit the main bullet points. So the main bullet points: don't do a 6-op or less startup. That's it.
No, so I think main bullet points, right? And this is, and we we are neglecting the solo because their situation is so simple, right? A solo, you need 4 ops or more. If you want to have a group, 7 is like barely minimally viable. 8 is a much more comfortable minimally amount. But if you are thinking about doing a startup, I think a situation that I'm starting to get behind more and more is one with an excess number of operatories, like 12 plus, where you could really grow into a large group, which is worth and you'll have high new patient flow, which will be a driver of growth. So
Right.
I think those are all situations I can get behind.
And we didn't even get into things like if you're building your own building, and maybe even some of that's like gray space. Like maybe you've got like a walled off section that you're like, we can tap into this, or do a short term lease for someone else so that eventually we can use this space.
Yeah.
Real estate can get very, very creative, and we haven't even scratched the surface of that.
Well, and I think we're right. I'm in the process right now of building, and we're having discussions about, what, like all of us at Shared Practice having discussions about, what are we going to do with this space that we're building?
Yeah.
And I think real estate could be its own whole thing, and I don't think that would serve a lot of people for us to talk about it that much.
No.
But I think it's the thing we'd like to plan in your mind is that this is a bigger deal than I initially realized, so probably a bigger deal than you think. And if this feels like a really visionary 10 years from now conversation, it's because that's the implications of real estate. It doesn't bother you today or tomorrow or next year, but these leases are long. And so you need to make sure that you're thinking about them with the end in mind.
Perfect. Well, that wraps up our episode. I don't think we've asked for. I haven't been asking for reviews recently. Since we broke 400, I've stopped like asking. We need a swell feature to Shared Practices that after listening to an episode, they get a text and it's a link to.
Did you
leave a
like that
review.
episode? Review us
like
on iTunes.
Please log into iTunes. And there's even been people who've created an iTunes account just to leave us a review because they were listening on like a non Apple device.
Oh, that's awesome.
Thank you for going above and beyond. For some reason, like other podcast platforms don't have reviews baked in them, but we really, really do appreciate those reviews on iTunes because it shows the industry, it shows our potential sponsors, it shows potential listeners that, hey, this has benefited you in some way. So please leave us a review, join us on our Facebook group, or if you're about to buy a practice or already in a practice, reach out to us about coaching, mastermind, and everything that we're offering right now. So we'd love to help you out.
Cool. Thanks, guys. And we'll see you next week. This has been season 6. See you guys.